Episode 34 of Red versus Blue. My name is Mike Stark.
And I'm Keith Curry.
And another crazy week. Now, before we start today, I want to give you some props, Keith, because when we started this podcast ages ago, you warned me that every week can be different. The climate of politics can change from week to week. It can go from one end of the spectrum to the other, and we have seen that dramatically this political season, haven't we?
We have. This has been one for the ages. So when they write the story of this campaign, it'll be, we thought we had this election won until, and then we go into the next chapter, and then a next chapter. It's unprecedented, the amount of careening and changes that we've seen in this cycle.
And the pendulum has swung back and forth. One side thought, oh, we've got it locked up. And then it swings the other way. No, we don't have it locked up. The other side has it locked up. And it seems like the pendulum right now is with the Democrats at this point, right?
They had a good couple of weeks. Democrats are now sort of on the march. They have stopped the hemorrhaging that was occurring in June because of Joe Biden's debate performance.
Right.
And the electoral map is beginning to show signs of shifting. So, yeah, it's been a good 3 weeks. The momentum is now with Kamala Harris and the Democrats.
And this week we found out who her vice president candidate was.
We did. And, Mike, you and I both predicted that it would either be Josh Shapiro or it would be Mark Kelly, as did every other Democratic and Republican consultant who understands politics and who understands what you need to do to help the ticket. And all of us were collectively incorrect about the choice. It ended up being Tim Walz. So the first point is that she did not pick Shapiro,
right,
who could have helped her in Pennsylvania. And there seems to be some evidence that it was because of significant opposition from Palestinian Democrats in Michigan and interest groups, left interest groups, including the teachers union across the country, who said, anybody but Shapiro, we don't want him. He's too pro-Israel. He wants choice for parents, and he was vetoed. There was a tinge of anti-Semitism in that, and Van Jones, to his credit on CNN, called that out and said it's something that the Democrats have to deal with.
Right.
For those reasons, actually. Shapiro has not been chosen, and Tim Walz is the candidate.
And what happened with Kelly, you think?
I think Arizona, they didn't think was going to be that important. He was not as compelling an image on TV as either Shapiro or Walz.
Right.
And probably no chemistry with Harris.
Gotcha. So Walz, we got him. What do you know about the guy?
Well, a couple of things. He's a convivial guy. Everybody sort of likes him. He's a guy you want to go out and have a beer with, except you can't go out and have a beer with him because he doesn't drink anymore after his DUI. He's got great speaking skills. He connects well with an audience. He looks like a Midwesterner. He goes out and he hunts deer. He shoots guns. They said he's not a DEI candidate. He's an REI candidate for his camo and all the other stuff he wears. So, he's a guy, an everyday guy that people kind of like him. But he does have some issues. I mean, he is a big liberal. I mean, his record can't be described any other way than that.
Yeah.
He may have been elected to Congress as a moderate, but he's certainly a governor as a liberal. And there's been several issues raised about it. And because these issues were also raised when he ran for Congress and governor, the fact checking and the get it to the public were pretty fast. Now, some of them are issues I don't think are going to stick. The issue that, for example, he claims to have been in combat service during the Iraq War. To be specific, he's very precise on the language. He was deployed during the Iraq War, which implies he was in Iraq.
Right.
But in fact, he was deployed to Italy. Now, a lot of people get deployed. We run the drone campaign out of Nevada. So those people are involved in the Iraq theater as well. But he never made it to Iraq. He was in Italy. So people have said, well, he's misrepresenting his service. Okay. Yes, he didn't go to Iraq, but yes, he was in fact deployed. So there's a little bit of truth on both sides. We'll see how far they get with that issue.
And 20 years of service, right?
He has been in 20 years of service. He made one comment in advocating for gun control that we shouldn't have weapons on the street that I fired in war. Well, in fact, he didn't fire it in war. He fired it because he is apparently an expert marksman, and he did target practice training in Italy with the troops, but didn't fire the guns in war. And then it's alleged that he resigned from his unit just before they were deployed to Iraq. And there was a guy on TV earlier who was in the unit. There were rumors that they were going to be deployed. They didn't have the direct orders until after he had retired. Right. Now, he was going to run for Congress, and he was having served more than 20 years. So the fact that he would retire is not necessarily something you would not be expecting. But nonetheless, he did it on the eve of deployment to an actual combat zone. And so he's being criticized for that.
So is this going to stick?
Well, it'll stick among the true believing MAGA crowd. I think with general voters, those issues are going to have a marginal impact. Chris LaCivita, who did the Swift Boat campaign against John Kerry, happens to be Trump's campaign manager. So I'm pretty sure he's going to try and make an issue out of those. I don't know that they're going to get very far. Where they are going to get far, however, is in his deployment of the National Guard following the George Floyd riot in Minneapolis. The mayor of Minneapolis requested the Guard on May 27. Walz delayed deploying the Guard until 2:30 in the afternoon on the next day, May 28th. And of course, when you deploy the Guard, a light doesn't come on. They come down fire poles, get in the truck, and go to the riot. Everybody's at work. They got to get childcare. They got to arrange with your employer. They got to show up at the armory, get their guns issued, wait for all the other guys in the unit to get in a slow-moving truck, and get to the situation. So as a result, they were not able to get there until the 29th or the 30th. And while this was happening, Walz's daughter in the governor's mansion is sending out texts and emails on Twitter telling the rioters the National Guard's not going to get here until tomorrow. You got plenty of time.
Yikes.
So that's going to be a problem. Now, it took them until apparently the 30th or 31st in May to suppress the riot. And then, ironically, on June 1, Donald Trump gets on the phone and says, "You did a great job, Tim," and, hitting them hard and suppressing the riot.
In the tradition of always stepping in it, right?
Well, exactly. Now, the mayor of Minneapolis will tell you that he thought the deployment was slow and delayed. And of course, Minneapolis was one of the cities where they burned a police precinct, and it was one of the most damaged cities during the riots.
Right.
So that is an issue that he's going to have to deal with. And of course, Kamala Harris was right there involved in bailing out many of the George Floyd rioters across the country, including Minnesota.
Right.
And here's the problem. You can't run against January 6th when that is your record about the George Floyd riots. And so the Democrats are stepping on their own best lines with that kind of a record. Here is the other issue that he's going to have to face. Minnesota, while it's perceived as a blue state, it votes that way presidentially. It's very mixed locally. And so they have had a series of very good Republican governors and a Republican legislature. And they had a Republican legislature through the first 2 years of Walz's term. And then the Democrats took control. And like any party does, if it's been out of power for a while, they have a pent-up agenda of things they want to pass. Right. Much of it is pretty left-wing virtue signaling, just as conservatives would do if they took over after a long period in the wilderness. When they do that in California, Jerry Brown was usually pretty good about vetoing that stuff. Gavin Newsom, less so. But Tim Walz did not veto much of it at all. And so as a result, in Minnesota, they have, 81,000 illegal aliens were issued driver's license. They raised income taxes to the fifth highest rate in the country. They still have an inheritance tax. He gave free college. He gave paid family leave raised by new taxes. He proposed 100% carbon-free electricity by 2030, which is a very expensive thing and hard to do in a cold weather climate like Minnesota. And he made Minnesota a trans refuge state and put tampon dispensers in boys' bathrooms. Now, before Tuesday was over, on the day that he was announced, Tampon Tim ads were popping up on Facebook.
Yeah.
He's going to have a hard time sort of explaining that he is a moderate, everyday kind of guy with that kind of record. And again, you cannot run against weird if you're the guy that put tampons in the boys' bathroom. So once again, stepping on their lines. And then finally, Mr. Walz, who's 60 years old, has no investments of any kind other than a 529 plan for his daughter's college. So you have to wonder, okay, this is a guy with no stake in the American economy, no stake in understanding how business works or how investment works. And that it gives me pause as an investor because those people are not sympathetic to investors and everybody that has a retirement plan and a 401k and all of that. So that's his story. And he's off to the campaign, though. And so far, it's been a relatively successful introduction. But he's going to have some issues to deal with.
And fortunately, I guess, for that campaign, the Kamala momentum has been so big that some of that stuff is just kind of a side distraction.
Well, she had a very good couple of weeks, a very good rollout. She's got the Democratic base now coalesced behind her. We know now this selection of Walz is that there's going to be no real significant outreach to moderates. There is a Republicans for Harris, 16 former members of the House, people who served in Democratic cabinets like Ray LaHood and Chuck Hagel, Adam Kinzinger and Bill Will, people who had opposed Trump over the years. It's not going to be significant and not going to be very impactful with Republican voters, but it does exist. Give them credit for that. Georgia, New Hampshire, Nevada, Arizona, and Minnesota all moved in a Democratic direction last week on the Cook Political Report and the other political reports. So she has stemmed the big defection that we saw in the aftermath of the debate to bring Democrats home.
And I think that's what surprised me the most was how dramatic that change was.
Well, it was because there was so much angst, and we've talked about this before, Mike. You've raised this issue amongst the Democratic base that Joe Biden was a slow-moving train wreck that was going to happen and needed to be changed. And give Nancy Pelosi the credit for having the ice water intervenes to hang in there and produce the change. And she did. But let's just also point out that all is not roses for Mrs. Harris. I'm actually looking forward to the Democratic convention because she means to finally give a different speech than the one she's been given for the past 3 weeks. She hasn't really said anything. I was with a bunch of people, former legislators, former congresspeople, political guys yesterday. The Republicans really don't fear Harris and Walz. What they fear is Trump continuing to blow himself up, and he's doing that in spades. That's the real problem that Republicans face. And here's the deal. In the last 3 weeks, the biggest debate going on has been the debate between the 2020 Harris and the 2024 Harris, because she appears to have flip-flopped on her position on fracking. She's flip-flopped on her position on Medicare for all. She met with a group of Palestinians when she was in Detroit. They claim that she allegedly told them that she was going to support an arms embargo against Israel, which her staff has spent the week walking back. She's backtracked on crime. So, like I say, the big debate right now has been the 2020 Harris and the 2024 Harris. She has not sat down with reporters and clarified any of these issues. So that's a minefield that she's going to have to walk through going forward.
Is some of this just what we talked about, I think, last week about, is it just moving the politics a little bit towards the center, which all candidates do when it comes time for the general election?
I'm sure all of it is just that. But to do it, you've got to have sort of a rationale, a reason why you're doing it. You can't just simply say, oh, why did I say that? What I really meant to say was I meant this. And that's sort of where she is right now. And she's got to get good answers to those questions. But where this leaves us is that neither campaign. Well, first of all, before we move on to that, let's talk about Trump. He's had issues as well. In his recent press conference, first of all, he's challenged Harris to a debate, to 3 debates, and they've now agreed on one. The old ABC debate is now back on.
Right.
That's going to be a very high-stakes debate for both candidates, but I think Trump has got a real risk now of looking like the wrong guy. And he's had his own share of flip-flops, too. He's now the Bitcoin candidate. He's now the TikTok candidate because he's got some major donors who invest in those businesses. He wants to eliminate taxes on tips and Social Security income, which would be great for you and me, but it would cost the Treasury about $3 trillion, ignite inflation, and make Social Security non-sustainable. And, it's Friday, so I have no idea what his position is on abortion, but it's subject to change. Oh, and here's the other thing. He apparently had a helicopter ride with Willie Brown where Willie told him bad things about Kamala Harris, said she was really a nasty person. The helicopter nearly crashed. Now, all of that is true, except it wasn't Willie Brown. It was Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom, who happened to be in the helicopter. There was no discussion about Kamala Harris. He was president of the United States at the time, so if the helicopter had almost crashed, the world would have known it. The helicopter did not almost crash. It was expecting California wildfire damage. Newsom was the governor-elect.
I remember that.
Both Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom say there was no discussion of Kamala Harris while they were in the helicopter together. So this is one of those stories completely made up that Trump is going to be asked about, but it's also going to raise questions about his mental acuity too. So he's in the barrel that Joe Biden was in, and he's going to have to deal with these issues going forward, all of which would create a great opportunity for a third-party candidate, given the extremes of these candidates.
Wow.
Except,
that's a great point. Now let's look at who the third-party candidates are. Oh, RFK.
Yeah, I did not know that Mr. Kennedy was a falconer, that he hunts with falcons. And presumably he had brought back some food. I don't know what falcons hunt for, but presumably pigeons and rats and gophers. And he was carrying some of that, I guess, back with him to Westchester, New York, from the Hudson Valley for dinner. And he came upon a bear dead in the street, a bear cub. And he stopped and decided that he would like to skin the bear and save the meat and put it in his freezer, which is apparently 32 cubic feet. He said it would, 1,000 cubic foot freezer, but people have fact checked that. So he puts the bear in his car, and he goes on to New York City because he's having dinner that night with a bunch of guys at Peter Luger's. Now, Peter Luger's is not a typical restaurant. It is a bastion in lower Manhattan. It is the premier big steak, big expensive steak, big expensive red wine place to eat in New York. And apparently it was the night was running long, and he's talking to his friends about, what am I going to do with this bear? He apparently had to get on an airplane and fly because he's got a house in California where his wife and his ravens, he raises ravens, live. Now, I will just say this, because I spent a lot of time in New York. There is really no direct way to get from lower Brooklyn to Kennedy Airport, LaGuardia Airport, or Newark Airport by going through Central Park. But nonetheless, they decided the thing we're going to do is let's take the bear and let's drop the bear in Central Park. And I've got this old bicycle. I'll throw the bicycle on top of it. It'll look like a bicycle hit the bear and killed it, and then the guy ran off. And then I'm going to go to the airport and fly, I guess, back to California, wherever he is, with the pigeons and whatever else still left in the car. And that's what they do. And apparently they were drinking a very good wine because everybody says, hey, that's a hell of an idea. Let's go. Now, this is a guy who wants to be the president of the United States.
Right. It should also be pointed out that became a big news story, as I understand it, that it was a mystery that this bear was found in Central Park, right?
It was. And it was written up in the New York Times. And the person who wrote it up, reporting for the New York Times, was none other than John F. Kennedy's granddaughter, I guess his great niece or something, who didn't know it involved Robert Kennedy. It was a mystery story, which was in the New York press for several weeks. Kennedy himself, by the way, is in New York today trying to prove that he is an actual New York resident because he used his New York residency on his petitions to qualify for the ballot. 4 voters are alleging he actually lives in California, which is where his wife, Cheryl Hines, lives.
Right.
And it's where he keeps his ravens, which he trains to put poker chips in your pocket because, that's what every man does when he's not out falconing. And he is there trying to persuade people he's really a New Yorker. And if he gets kicked off the ballot in New York, he'll get kicked off in several other states where he used the same address. He didn't use his California address because he picked a Californian for vice president, and that creates constitutional issues.
Oh, my God.
So he's having a rough week.
I guess. And did we ever determine, was there any laws broken with this bear incident?
If they were, they had statute of limitations, this is 10 years ago.
Okay.
He was 60 years old when he did this, by the way. But the statute of limitations has run.
Gotcha. Wow.
But he did admit, by the way, that he often finds and collects and eats roadkill.
Which, okay, I'm okay with that. It's just this whole bear thing. And then he tells the story to Roseanne Barr.
Well, of course. And, Roseanne Barr looks like the same person in this conversation because you can watch her face going, wow, this is some weird shit. And he just keeps on going like, if you found a bear when you wanted to skin it, you'd throw it in the back of the truck and take it home, put it in the fridge. Doesn't everybody?
Wow. It's just an example of the canvas of this political season because it's just a mess.
I think we have a new lesson that will go down that political campaign managers will tell their underlings and the people they're tutoring for years to come. And that is, when it comes to politics, don't mess with dogs, don't mess with cats, and don't mess with bears.
It has been an animal-like campaign season, without a doubt. I think on that note, a little levity, we shall say goodbye and be back next week. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. Like our Facebook page and join us next week for another edition of Red versus Blue.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.